April 8th, 1943. 27,000 feet above the French coast. The oxygen mask could not hide the smirk on a German flight leader's face as he watched the newcomers climb. Through the clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5, the American shapes below looked absurd. Barrel chests, tiny wings, huge propellers, flying milk bottles, he joked over the radio. His wingmen laughed. Below, 16 Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group clawed for altitude. Pratt and Whitney double Wasp engines thundered at full power. 7 tons of metal and armor and ammunition pushed skyward, step by grinding step. To men raised on sleek Messerschmitts and tight-turning Spitfires, the Thunderbolt looked like a mistake with a cockpit. What they did not know was simple. They were watching the arrival of a new kind of weapon. Within 18 months, the laughter would stop. The 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns would speak. And when they spoke together, they turned fighters into wreckage in a heartbeat. The math of destruction was waiting inside those broad wings. 3,400 rounds ready to fire. A combined rate of fire near 6,000 rounds each minute. A convergence pattern that put a hailstorm into a space no wider than a car. Hold that trigger for a second and a half, and a fighter could be cut in two. The transformation began that April morning. Major Donald Blakesley of the 335th Fighter Squadron saw the German attack developing. Blakesley was an Eagle Squadron veteran. He knew the truth most of his men had not yet learned. To live in a Thunderbolt, you did not turn with the enemy. You did not climb with them at low altitude. You used weight. You used power. You used the guns. This was not a normal fighter. This was a machine built on different logic. The Germans had chased lightness. Their interceptors climbed fast and turned hard. Republic aviation went the other way. Mass, horsepower, altitude, and durability. A juggernaut that rewrote the rules. It had been born in a moment of panic. June of 1940. France was collapsing. The United States Army Air Corps asked for a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching the best the Luftwaffe had. Alexander Kartveli, the chief designer at Republic and an immigrant with a relentless mind, gave them something bolder. It will be a dinosaur, he told his team, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions. The prototype flew in May of 1941. It shocked everyone who saw it roll down the runway. The turbo-supercharger was huge. The ducting ran through the fuselage like a second spine. The airplane looked pregnant. Pilots laughed and asked the same question. Will this thing fly? It did. And at altitude, it flew like nothing the Americans had ever sent to war. The double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial, could keep its full power high in the thin air. The exhaust-driven turbo-supercharger kept the engine breathing at heights where other fighters faded. 27,000 feet, 30,000 feet, even beyond. But first came pain. When the first groups trained on the P-47, they bled. The airplane ground-looped when mishandled. It could torque roll on takeoff if you were sloppy with your feet. In a steep dive, pilots met compressibility. Control surfaces went heavy. Shock waves locked the stick. Men died figuring out the boundary lines. Colonel Hubert Zemke, known as Hub, initially disliked the machine. His 56th Fighter Group paid in wrecks and funerals. Yet the pilots who persisted began to find the rhythm. One young lieutenant, Robert Johnson from Oklahoma, climbed out of his first flight and said it plain. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You did not fly it. You aimed it. The first clashes over occupied Europe were rough. The Thunderbolt would not turn with a Focke-Wulf 190. It would not outclimb a Messerschmitt 109 at low to medium altitude. German Staffels exploited these truths. They dove in from below. They forced turning fights. They expected easy victories. A German group commander, Josef Priller of Jagdgeschwader 26, sent back a cutting assessment after his first meeting. The new American fighter is lumber. Our boys call them fat targets pretending to be warriors. The statistics seem to agree. Losses mounted for the Americans. Kills were few. British observers shook their heads and muttered that the Yanks had chosen the wrong horse. But two things were hiding in plain sight. First, the Thunderbolt could take punishment and keep flying. Radial engines had no radiator to puncture. Coolant did not leak out because there was none. Armor plate guarded the pilot. Thick spars held the wings. Crews counted holes by the dozen and still watched their pilots taxi home. Second, when the P-47 lined up a shot, the effect was terrifying. 8 guns, all in the wings, all harmonized to meet at a chosen distance. Tracer, armor-piercing incendiary, and ball rounds mixed in belts designed to both punch and ignite. Unlike cannon with small ammunition loads, the Americans could keep the trigger down. Half a minute of sustained fire if needed. In air combat, that is an eternity. The incident that rattled the Luftwaffe came in late June of 1943. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson was limping home in a shot-up Thunderbolt. His canopy was stuck. His engine was sputtering. Oil covered his windscreen. A lone Focke-Wulf latched onto him and poured in fire at close range. 20-millimeter shells. 13-millimeter machine gun bursts. When the cannon ran dry, the German made another pass with his remaining ammunition. The Thunderbolt staggered but refused to die. The German pilot pulled up alongside, looked across the wing at the battered American, and, as the story has been told ever since, offered a salute before breaking away. Johnson made it to England. His crew stopped counting holes after 200. That story traveled fast. In American engineering rooms, pride hardened into certainty. In German ready rooms, disbelief curdled into unease. The big American fighter could soak up a hurricane and still bring its pilot home. By July of 1943, tactics caught up with the machine. Hub Zemke drilled a new gospel. Stay high. Stay fast. Dive hard. Hit once. Climb away. Do not be lured into a turn. Do not waste the airplane's gifts. Use gravity as an ally. Use the turbo at altitude. Use the 8 guns when the sight is full. Pilots called it boom and zoom. The result, when done right, felt like a hammer dropping from heaven. At 30,000 feet, the Thunderbolt could roll on its back and dive. The speed built frighteningly fast. The control forces grew heavy, but the airplane stayed honest. At 500 miles per hour and more, the P-47 crossed the defensive arcs of German fighters so quickly that return fire was often wild and late. Then came the deep raids. August 17, 1943. Schweinfurt and Regensburg. The American heavy bombers pushed further into Germany than ever before. Range was the Thunderbolt's weak spot, even with external tanks. But over France and Belgium, the escorts met the interceptors. One American flight rolled down on a formation of twin-engine Messerschmitt destroyers lining up to attack the bombers. The gunners in those German machines saw the Thunderbolts take hits and keep coming. Then 8 streams of tracers met, and something terrible happened. The first twin-engined fighter did not spiral down. It disintegrated. Wings parted. Tail broke. The sky filled with fragments. German airmen had seen cannon bursts chew through aircraft. But they had never faced 8 synchronized .50 caliber guns from multiple attackers at once. It was not a duel. It was a storm front. The firepower had numbers behind it. Each Thunderbolt carried 425 rounds per gun in many units. Multiply by 8. At a convergence of roughly 300 yards, the streams of bullets crossed into a tight space. In that envelope lived raw energy. A wall of lead, pilots called it. Whichever airplane flew through that wall paid in pieces. By autumn, another truth emerged. The P-47 loved thin air. The turbo-supercharger kept the double wasp at full song as the altimeter spun past 25,000 feet. German engines relied on mechanical superchargers. Above 25,000 feet, their power fell off. The Luftwaffe had proud aces. They were brave. They were skilled. But even a master struggles when his machine is short of breath. On an October day in 1943, one of Germany's finest, Hans Philipp, did not come back from an interception of American bombers. Accounts differ on the exact details. What filtered back into German debriefs was consistent in mood, high altitude, thunderbolts above. A sudden dive, gunfire like a giant tearing sheet metal, and then an explosion. It felt like a turning point. If a veteran of hundreds of missions could be caught and killed, what hope did the average pilot have? In Berlin, reports piled up. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet. Its dive speed approached the edge of compressibility. The cockpit had a thick, bullet-resistant windscreen. Armor shielded the pilot's back. The engine sat behind deflection plates. The structure was massively overbuilt compared to earlier fighters. Damage that would shred a Spitfire or a Messerschmitt might barely slow the American. The airplane itself kept evolving. In early 1944, a new propeller arrived. A Hamilton Standard Hydromatic with paddle-shaped blades nearly 13 feet across. The effect was immediate. Climb rate jumped. Acceleration improved. The heavy fighter gathered speed more quickly in the horizontal, and it clawed upward with new authority. Crews noticed another change. The sound. At full power, the blade tips approached the speed of sound. A hard, drumming thunder carried for miles. German troops on the ground learned to recognize it. They called it thunderclap. Water injection arrived too, with anti-detonant fluid flowing and the throttle forward to war emergency power. The double wasp could deliver bursts of even greater horsepower. Pilots used it to punch out of trouble, to gain that extra 100 feet, or to open the gap that no enemy could close in a dive. Range crept outward. Drop tanks under the wings, 108 gallons each in a common fit. Sometimes a smaller belly tank. With good fuel management and careful hands, the Thunderbolts could stay with the bombers deeper into Germany, then shed their tanks and fight. The Luftwaffe tried to concentrate on the B-17 formations. It became deadly to do so. To reach the heavies, you had to pass the escorts. The escorts were waiting. The 56th Fighter Group became famous as the Wolfpack. Zemke led. Blake Slee led. David Schilling led. Walker Bud Mahurin became one of the early aces. Francis Gabby Gabreski climbed the list of top scorers. Robert Johnson, who had once ridden a cripple all the way home, wrote the rest of his story in enemy wreckage. Their tactics matured. Loose, flexible formations. Altitude stacked in layers. One element dove, another element guarded the high perch. Pilots set their gun convergence thoughtfully. Some preferred 300 yards. Some set tighter. The gyro gun sight, when it arrived, made deflection shooting more humane. Visibility improved when the bubble canopy variant entered service. The cockpit changed from a greenhouse to a dome. Pilots could finally see over their shoulders without a spine of metal blocking their view. The Luftwaffe adapted as best it could. They tried heavy head-on attacks against bomber streams. They fitted rockets under wings to break up tight bomber formations. They used heavily armed bomber destroyers. The Americans responded with discipline. Escorts stuck to the bombers until the strike zone. Then they went hunting. They ambushed the destroyers before they could set up their runs. A twin-engine fighter caught in the crossing threads of 8 guns was rarely lucky twice. There was another side to the Thunderbolt, and it soon grew just as feared. The fighter-bomber role. The rugged airframe invited hard work. P-47s took bombs under the wings and belly. They took rockets. They roared down low along rail lines and roads. Freight cars split. Locomotives burst steam and flame. Trucks burned. Airfields were raked. The same gust of bullets that cut fighters in the sky sliced through columns on the ground. In the West, after June 6, 1944, German ground troops learned to dread the sight and the sound. If the drumming approached, you dove for the ditch and prayed. Yet the air-to-air duel remained the crucible where respect was won. Ask any German pilot who survived those months. The big American with 8 guns was no joke. It dived like a stone. It climbed like a homesick angel once it had speed. It would not turn with you, but it did not need to. If you let it get above you, if you lost track of it among the contrails, the first warning might be the crack and tear of bullets hitting your airplane from a shallow angle. Far too fast to dodge. Numbers mattered. So did maintenance. The Americans could keep their beasts flying day after day. Ground crews learned the double wasp like a song. They swapped engines quickly. They patched holes with skill. Factories kept the parts coming. Industrial logic overwhelmed tactical brilliance. That was the quiet truth of the campaign. Still, it took skill to make the machines sing. Many young American pilots paid dearly in the spring and summer of 1943. Training improved because it had to. Instructors taught dive recovery techniques. They drilled energy management. They hammered the rule again and again. Do not turn. Fight your fight. If the fight turns into a swirling circle, climb straight out, regroup, and dive again. Pilots found a kind of poetry in it. Line up from high noon relative to the enemy. Roll inverted. Pick the target. Let the nose fall. Count the seconds. 2, 3, 4. Check the sight. A quick burst, not long. Let the tracers walk through the canopy and engine. Pull. Climb. The Thunderbolt's heavy nose came up slowly at first. Then momentum carried it toward the sky. The German behind you struggled to follow. He had less thrust at altitude. He had less mass to trade for speed. Soon he was shrinking. Then again, the roll. Again, the dive. Thunder in the headphones. Muffled roar through the fuselage. The dinosaur with good proportions did the rest. By early 1944, the mood in Luftwaffe units had shifted. Jokes about flying milk bottles faded. Reports began to use other words. Floods of fire. Superiority at great altitude. The enemy does not break off. The enemy comes back in pairs. One distracts, one kills. American pilots told their own stories in debriefs. A Messerschmitt caught at 300 yards. 1 second of trigger time, wings separate. A Focke-Wulf turning in front of a 3-ship element. The lead misses. The second slices a burst through the engine. The third fires short to spoil the next German's aim. Discipline, teamwork, and massed fire did what individual brilliance could not. It is easy to call the Thunderbolt ugly. It is easy to underestimate big things until they are moving fast. The airplane did not seduce on the ramp. It seduced in the stratosphere. It seduced when it came home with pieces missing that would have killed a pilot in any other machine. It seduced with a sound that rattled windows on the ground and nerves in the cockpits above. By the time spring gave way to summer in 1944, the laugh was gone. The P-47 had forced a new reality on its enemies, not because it was nimble, not because it was refined, but because it was built for a kind of war the Germans could not match, a war of altitude and energy and industrial might. 8 guns, a turbo in its gut, armor around its heart, a pilot who understood how to use those gifts. There is a line pilots sometimes use when they speak of the Thunderbolt. You did not fly it, you aimed it. Point the nose, manage the energy, keep your head on a swivel. Do not get greedy with the trigger. Keep your speed. Climb back to your pedestal. Come down again with the sun at your back and gravity in your pocket. In April of 1943, the big fighter drew snickers. In the months that followed, the snickers turned into cautious radio calls. By winter, the calls became warnings. And by spring, in the places where the contrails wove white paths over Europe, the sound of 8 Brownings spitting fire had a name: thunderclap. The men below heard it and ducked. The men in German cockpits heard it and prayed the hammer would fall on someone else. That is how a dinosaur with good proportions won the sky. Not with elegance, not with pirouettes, with altitude, with patience, with a wall of lead that ended fights almost before they began. The laughter stopped, the respect remained, and the legend of the Thunderbolt, the jug, the flying milk bottle that nobody should have underestimated, was written in steel, smoke, and the harsh, stuttering rhythm of 8 guns speaking as one.